If I can ask you, if you are in a pew and you have a little bit of space, can you scrunch in a bit? We have folks waiting to sit, so get friendly. It's cold out. You'll warm each other. If you could scoot in a bit. Thank you. You look like you're on a mission there.
We're going to try to get the TVs downstairs.
Oh, okay. I'll solve that. Good morning. There may or may not be any space left, but if you're sitting in a pew and you have space next to you, scoot over. There are lots of people back there who would maybe like to come sit next to you. If you have a nice, comfortable lap, make it available to somebody else. But there's still some space. So raise your hand if you have a seat. Yeah, there might be a few more available if you want to venture up and find a place to rest your weary body during the course of this. We are delighted this morning that you're part of this event as part of the King Institute for Faith and Culture's speaker series. I'm Martin Dotterweich, and I direct the King Institute for Faith and Culture. I also teach history here. We have 14 events this year. This one is in collaboration with the City of Bristol's Martin Luther King celebration. Father Boyle spoke last night as part of that event, and again this morning. We're very grateful to you for being here, especially to visitors. Glad you could join us. Please do make yourself known to us. Please like us on Facebook, and please sign up for the mailing list at the back. So you can keep abreast of what's happening. I'm grateful to the City of Bristol for their involvement in this event, and especially grateful for this event to Rosemary and Bill Burris. Rosemary's with us today, who made this event possible, which has been a very special event already, and looking forward to this morning as well. We are going to have another event next week. I'm going to go ahead and give you an announcement of that on the 27th. We normally run everything on a Monday. Tuesdays because of the holiday yesterday. Next Monday, we have Sean Okpebolo. Sean is a classical music composer, but he has deep roots in the Negro spiritual. And so he's going to be speaking about the way that tradition has influenced his life, his theology, and his writing of music. And he'll be here next Monday at 9:15 in the chapel and at 7 o'clock at Central Presbyterian Church. For today's event, Father Gregory will speak for a while, and then he'll stay up here. If you want to get a book, they're at the back for sale, and please bring it up if you want him to sign it. He has to hit the road for North Carolina pretty quickly after this, so we're going to skip question and answer. But if you do want to get a book signed, please bring it up at the end, or if you just want to come say hello, feel free to. If you don't know Father Greg's work, you should. He has been featured on a number of national media outlets. His book, Tattoos on the Heart, was a New York Times bestseller. His new book is called Barking to the Choir. His work has been featured not only in media outlets, but more importantly, in imitators. The work that he started in Los Angeles is called Homeboy Industries, begun in 1988 as a way of trying to intervene and help gang members in the most gang-ridden area of Los Angeles. It has been mimicked across the world, including Glasgow, where my sister-in-law has encountered it directly. And the model is based on treating gang members as human beings and reaching out in love, as you will hear a great deal about from Father Greg. He started out as a priest in Bolivia. When he went to Los Angeles, he went as priest to the Dolores Mission, and that's where Homeboy was born. He's the recipient of numerous awards, and his books are worth reading. I strongly recommend them. I recommend the audiobook. The audiobook is so much fun to listen to because you just get to listen to him tell stories, and it was a delight the whole way through. But please do pick up a copy of the book at the end, and we're pleased you're here. Please join me in welcoming Father Gregory Boyle.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be with all of you, and those of you students who are forced against your will to be here. I really am deeply grateful to you. How many of you were at the talk last night? Okay, so this is a weird thing, a neurotic thing, so won't say anything that I said last night, because it's always a kind of, I remember once I was invited to speak to a huge gathering in Southern California of foster grandparents, and every summer they would gather. Well, I had spoken at it the summer before, and I thought, why are they inviting me again? It's kind of the same talk, same audience, and so after I finished that second talk, a grandmother came up to me, a foster grandmother, and I think she liked the talk because she had big tears in her eyes, and she grabbed both my hands and she said, "I heard you last year. It never gets better." Well, kind of hoping she misspoke there, you know. I remember I had a homie named Hector, 16 years old, a terrific kid who was back in school for the first time. He was like an elementary school grade dropout, you know, and smart kid. And he was sitting in front of my desk. I was doing something, and he was making small talk. He said, "Oh, by the way, I ran into a man who attended one of your talks once." I said, "Really? You did?" And he goes, "Yes. He found your talk rather monotonous." I said, "My gosh, seriously?" "Well, actually, no, that didn't happen. But you know, I need practice using bigger words." And I said, "Thank you for practicing on somebody else, please." Anyway, here's what I think your gathering is about. It's about a vision. It's about wanting to see the world to look differently than it currently looks. Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? The prophet Habakkuk writes, "The vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it." But we don't wait, you know, con los brazos cruzados, you know, and tapping our feet and staring at our watches. We try to make something happen. And so this is what we're about in our education, in your time here at King, in your service. We want to imagine a circle of compassion, and then we want to imagine nobody standing outside that circle. Our vision is really about dismantling the barriers that exclude. And to that end, we inch our way out to the margins, because that's the only way they will ever get erased, is if we all go out to them and situate ourselves there with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, with the widow, orphan, stranger, with the least, the last, and the lost, as Dr. King would say. We go and stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. We stand with those whose dignity has been denied. We choose to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. And we stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And we go to the margins and we stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. And to that end, we seek to create a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. It's what Dr. King would have called the beloved community. We want to create a sense of kinship, because no kinship, no peace, no kinship, no justice, no kinship, no equality. No matter how singularly focused we may well be on those worthy goals, they actually can't happen unless there's some undergirding sense that we belong to each other. Any exceptions to that? No exceptions to that. And so I suspect if we were about the mission and the vision to create a community of kinship, we would no longer be promoting justice. We would be celebrating it. For there's an idea that's taken root in the world. It's at the root of all that's wrong with it. And the idea would be this, that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives. We stand against that idea. So the goal is kinship. This is God's dream come true, that you may be one. And it's been the privilege of my life to know homies. And they've altered my heart, and the day won't ever come when I am more wise or closer to God, or have more courage than the thousands and thousands of gang members I've come to know in the last 35 years. People like Luis Perez, who kind of ran the place for a time, gang member, shot caller, heroin addict, was in prison. And he was a good speaker. You know, he started to be in demand. High schools would say, hey, could you send Luis Perez to speak? And he liked speaking, talking about his story and his experience. And one night we went out to dinner and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly. And so he says, you know, you gotta pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. And I said, yeah, no shit. That is some good advice there. So brace yourselves. I come to think of it, anything of value that I've ever learned, I've been taught by homies about compassion, about our essential goodness, about what love actually means. But in the last several years, the homies have taught me how to text, and I'm so grateful to them because I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I'm pretty dexterous at it, you know, even this morning, it's whatever it is, 7 o'clock in LA, but they're, oh my God, texting me. And so LOL and OMG and BTW and OHN, which is a new one that the homies taught me, that apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. And I know I can't be alone in being vexed by this autocorrect thing. You know, I had a homegirl named Bertha. She's a tough cookie. And on a Sunday, she texts me and she says, where you at? And so I'm texting her back, I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas. And monjas in Spanish is sisters, nuns, religious women. I'm about to speak to a room full of monjas. I pushed send and autocorrect told her that I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas, which she thought was pretty darn interesting. Even now, it's 7 o'clock in the morning in LA, and their hair is always on fire, and oh my gosh, my car note, and they're going to cut off my lights, and it's, you know, I'm the priest they mistook for an ATM machine, and so it's just constant. And so I had a homie who said, I just need $100 to finish off my rent, and I didn't have it. So I wrote back simply, things are tight. And I pushed send, and autocorrect told him, thongs are tight. And he wrote me back, sorry to hear that. You know, what about my rent? So there I am with two older homies, older vatos, Manuel and Poncho, and they do a variety of things and at Homeboy, and we have morning meeting where we have 500 people. You got to come to it sometimes. It's magical. And it's announcements, and there's a prayer, and one of the homies gets up and does the thought for the day, and we sing happy birthday. It's just glorious. Heaven won't be different than the morning meeting. And so right after the morning meeting, these older vatos, Manuel and Poncho, come with me, and they're going to help me give a talk at a high school. Manuel's in the front seat, Poncho's in the back. And we're 15 minutes on the road when Manuel gets an incoming text, and he reads it, and he kind of chuckles. And I said, what is it? He goes, oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. I just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazo as the day began. Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of our trainees, all gang members. It is a tough job. I would not want it, you know, because this may come as a surprise, but gang members can occasionally be attitudinal. So I said, well, what's he say? Oh, it's dumb. Hang on, let me find it. Here it is. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, I nearly drove into oncoming traffic. We all laughed so damn hard. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They are from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other because I remember, now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? How do we bridge the distance that exists between us, even in our service provider, service recipient. That you may be one is God's dream come true. So Homeboy Industries was started a long time ago, 1988, as Martin mentioned, and I was assigned as pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, Dolores Mission, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. Together, at the time, they comprised the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other, leading the LAPD to call my parish the place of the highest concentration of gang activity anywhere. So if LA is the gang capital of the world, my parish was the gang capital of Los Angeles. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and I buried my 252nd on Friday. Not all from that community, obviously, but I run a very large gang intervention program, and I get asked to do this. So the first thing we did was we started a school because there were so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. So they were wreaking havoc in the middle of the day in the projects. They were writing on walls, they were selling drugs, they were violent, and so I decided to walk out to them, and I would kind of isolate them. I'd go, hey, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said, yeah, I would. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them. That sort of was a challenge there. So right across the street from the church is our elementary school, Dolores Mission School, and it's grades K to 8. The school occupied the first 2 floors, but the entire 3rd floor was the convent where the ninjas lived. And so one evening I gathered all the nuns in the living room. I sat them down and I said, hey, would you guys mind, moving out, and we could turn the convent into a school for gang members. And I remember they looked at each other and they went, sure. And that was the entirety of their discernment process. And so we were off and running. Gang members came in large numbers to the church property. Parishioners would kind of sidle up to me and they'd say, hey, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and bad people out, which I thought was a good gospel challenge. And then the homie said, if only we had jobs. So myself and the women in the parish was mainly women with children, we marched around the factories that surrounded the projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers. And that wasn't so forthcoming. So we started things, like a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of rival gang members from the 8 gangs. Then in 1992, after the Rodney King verdict, every pocket of poverty in Los Angeles exploded, except the poorest pocket, my parish, didn't. And so the LA Times wanted to know why that was, so they came and interviewed me, and I said, well, I don't know. I think maybe it had something to do with the fact that we had 60 strategically hired gang members who had a reason to get up in the morning and were working side by side with their enemies. And they had a reason not to gangbang the night before, and more to the point of your question, they had a reason not to torch their own community. So the next morning, the article appears, and a movie producer named Ray Stark read it, and he happened to have $500 million. So he summoned me to his Beverly Hills office, and he said, how should I spend my money? As I look back on it now, I see that I woefully undershot my request, but I was young, I had hair. So I said, well, there's an abandoned bakery across the street from the school. You could buy it. It has ovens already. They don't work, but you could fix them. And I don't know, we could put hairnets on rival gang members and they could bake bread, and I don't know, we could call it Homeboy Bakery. And that was the extent of my entire business plan. And he said, sure. So we were off and running. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future to Homeboy Industries, as if there was any, industry involved in this. And not everything worked. I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And so nobody intends to do such a thing, but we've evolved our way. We've backed our way now into becoming the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry program on our planet. And it all started with Homeboy Bakery. If you can imagine, in those early days, this was a heightened time of demonization. Demonizing is always the opposite of God, and it's always untruth. So when you hear people demonize, you go, oh, for a second there, I thought he was giving me a fact. It's always untruth, and we can take that to the bank. But that was kind of the first 10 years of Homeboy, was death threats, bomb threats, hate mail. Not from gang members, but from folks who hated gang members, who demonized. And Homeboy Bakery became this symbol. It was the first time, it was an exit ramp off this crazy, violent freeway. Before then, there was no exit ramp. So gang members, what did that do? It compounded people's despair, and it increased the violence. Once you had an exit ramp, it was a kind of a release and relief, and it symbolized something. What if we were to invest in people rather than just try to incarcerate our way out of things? So it was famous, and it got a lot of attention. We had, news crews were there almost every day, busloads of Japanese tourists, take me to your bakery, and Prince Charles's business advisors came to visit, And our foreman at the time was a guy named Ramon. And Ramon was the biggest drug dealer I had ever met, and I knew all of them. And he always resisted my offers of help. He always says, oh, I'm okay. And in recovery, it takes what it takes. It can be the birth of a son, the death of a friend, a long stretch in prison. I suspect for Ramon it was, the birth of his daughter Clarissa, but hard to say. He was a leader in his gang, and he was a very lucrative drug dealer. So he became a leader in the bakery. And not only did he work with his enemies, he was supervising them, which is a great deal more difficult. But an added feature of his job description was he had to greet all these tourists, and the news people, and he hated that part. So one time we were standing out in front of the bakery, and there was a busload coming of farmers from the people who owned farms in Central California. They wanted to see the famous Homeboy Bakery. And he and I are standing in front of the bakery waiting for them, and he's having a bad attitude day, and I'm saying, get over it. And the bus pulls in, and hi, yeah, just park right there, that's fine. And on the bus is one of those modern, sleek, ultra-modern buses with the microphone at the front for the tour guide. And he pretends he's on the microphone. Welcome to Homeboy Bakery. Observe gang members in their natural habitat. Please keep your hands in the bus at all times. Do not attempt to feed the homies. They are not yet tame. And I'm saying, cállate, cabrón. And so, hi, how are you? And I welcome them. And I never give tours. And I leave them with Ramon. And so I go back to my office. Well, I come back later, I see him, and it triggers the memory that, oh, he had a tour. Hey, how did that tour go with those farmers? He goes, damn, gee, what's up with white people anyway? I said, I don't know. What is up with us? He says, well, they always be using the word great. I said, we do? He goes, yeah, check this out. This busload of gabachos, white folks, come in and they see the the bakery and the ovens and everything's so clean, and this place is great. And they see the homies, knowing their enemies, working side by side. You fellas are great. Then they try the bread, and they go, wow, this bread, it's great. He says, how come white people always be using the word great? I said, I have no idea. I'd never heard this before. And trust me, from that moment forward, every opportunity I could find, I told him how great he was, just to mess with him. And so, in those days, we would, they'd shut down at 11 o'clock. Now we're around the clock. We never shut down. And so at 11 o'clock, I came at closing time, and I'm parking my car, and Ramon sees me, and he rushes to me. He's never excited about anything. I can barely get out of the car. He goes, you're not going to believe what happened last night. So he tells me that he goes to pick up his 4-year-old daughter, Clarissa, at the babysitter's, and seatbelts are in, and he drives to their humble little apartment where for the first time in his life, he's paying honestly earned, clean, decent money to pay for that apartment. He unlocks the door, and she scurries down this little thin hallway, and she gets to the living room, and she plants her feet, and she extends her arm, and she takes the room in with her gaze, and she says, "This is great." And he says to me, I thought she was turning white on me, and he gets down at eye level, and he says, "Mija, what's great?" And little Clarissa clutches her chest with great emotion, and she says, "My home." And as soon as he says these two words, both of us instantly, our eyes well up with tears, and we're staring at each other for what feels like an eternity. And we stare at each other as we watch the tears come down our faces. And finally, I break the silence, and I say, "You did this. You've never had a home in your life, and now you have one. You did this. You used to be the biggest drug dealer in town. You stopped. You baked bread instead. You did this. You've never had a father in your life, and now you are one. And I hate to have to tell you, but you're great." And I hate to have to tell you that the very first time I retrieved that story from my memory bank was to tell it at Ramon's funeral. Only 3 months later, he had been packing his car to go on a camping trip, and some guys came into his part of the projects and saw him, and their faces masked, covered, and they must have thought, he'll do, and they executed him. And the reason I told this story was because of the questions I kept being asked by his friends and homies during the time that spanned his death to his burial. They kept saying, "What's the point of doing good if that can happen to you?" And I thought it was a good question, and it was worthy of a response. So I stood in front of a packed church and people sitting up in the choir loft like you guys. And I said, here was the point. Before Ramon left us, he knew the truth of who he was, that he was exactly what God had in mind when God made him. And he became that truth. He inhabited that truth. He knew, as the Buddhists say, "O nobly born, remember who you really are." He knew who he really happened to be. And no bullet can pierce that. No 4 prison walls can keep that out. But death can't touch it because it's huge. But at Homeboy, with the 15,000 who walk through our door and find themselves cherished in a community of tenderness that is palpable and true, as they receive every manner of service, from tattoo removal to therapy to classes on every imaginable thing. We still have a school, and we have 9 social enterprises where folks work side by side. We know that you have to reach in and you have to dismantle messages of shame and disgrace that keep people from seeing their truth. For the principal suffering of the poor throughout history and throughout Scripture is shame and disgrace. And in the Acts of the Apostles, it has this one odd sentence that says simply, "And awe came upon everyone." And it suggests that the measure of health in any community at all may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. For all of us are called to be enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love return people to themselves. We don't ask them to measure up. Why would you, when they are exactly what God had in mind when God made them? But healing is what happens at Homeboy, and it's the relationship that heals. I call Homeboy sometimes the Discovery Channel, because folks discover the truth of who they are. And if you don't transform your pain, you'll just continue to transmit it. I had a homie named Jermaine, 30 years old, African-American from a gang in Los Angeles. And he came into my office and he said, "I discovered something today." And as he spoke, he talked about having retrieved a memory when he was 9 years old, and he's lying on his stomach and his fists are propping up his chin as he's watching the TV very close to the screen. When he catches through his peripheral vision, somebody's walked into the room, and he turns and he brings focus to his mom, who's standing in the doorway, and her arms are outstretched. And she has profoundly, deeply slit her wrists, and blood is coursing onto the floor. And she looks at her 9-year-old boy and she says, "See what you made me do." And the next day he was taken from her care and put in foster care. His most telling and horrible of all, frankly, is the fact that his other brother and sister weren't, only him. So that was at 9. At 13, he was jumped into a gang. At 17, he was raised the rest of the way by incarceration. And there he is at 30 years old, 4 months into his 18-month training program with us. And he's sobbing. And I let him cry. And I finally look at him, I said, "Jermaine, what did you discover today?" And when he could speak, he said, "I discovered today that all these years I had preferred my rage to my shame." And because he had made that discovery, for the first time in his life, he was able to forgive his mom for being mentally ill and forgive himself for having once been a 9-year-old boy. And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well despise the wounded. That you may be one. That is Jesus' dream come true. A community of kinship. It is God's longing that that happen. So at Homeboy, we have our 9 social enterprises, a bunch of restaurants and silkscreen and bakery, and we sell chips, salsa, and guacamole, and supermarkets, and we have a restaurant at LAX Terminal 4, American Airlines, and And we have Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude, will gladly take your order. And they cater. It's kind of a who's who. I challenge you, if you go there, you're going to run into Jane Fonda or Jim Carrey or Jack Black, Forrest Whitaker. There's a lot of movie stars go there because they want to support it. Elected officials, once Vice President Joe Biden, when he was vice president, we got 2 hours notice from the Secret Service that Vice President Biden wanted to have lunch at the famous Homegirl Cafe, motorcade and entourage and selfies with Joe Biden. And once famously, Diane Keaton came for lunch, movie star, Oscar winner, Godfather movies, Annie Hall. Her waitress is Glenda, and Glenda's a big girl, been there, done that, tattooed, felon, parolee. She has no idea who Diane Keaton is, and so Glenda's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, well, what do you recommend? And Glenda rattles off the 3 dishes she really likes, and Diane Keaton says, well, I'll have that second one. That one sounds really good. And it's at that moment something dawns on Glenda. She looks at Diane Keaton. She says, wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere. You know, like maybe we've met. And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it humbly. Oh, gosh, I don't know. I suppose I have one of those faces that people think they've seen before. And then Glenda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. Yeah. That just took my breath away, and I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings now that I think of it. But suddenly kinship so quickly. Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress. Exactly what God had in mind. That you may be one. That's the longing. Long lay the world in sin and error pining till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. And yeah, that's a Christmas carol about Christmas and Jesus, but how is it not the job description of everyone in this chapel? You appear and the soul feels its worth. It's supposed to work like that. I had a homie named Bandit he was a bandit, and he was, he'd be running up to cars to sell crack cocaine, and in Aliso Village housing projects, a gang member, drug dealer. I'd be riding my bike at night, and I'd see him, walking from a car counting his money. He was kind of embarrassed, but not that much, and always resistant of my offers to help, until one day he showed up at Homeboy Industries. And our program is not for those who need help, it's only for those who want it. You have to walk in the door, and I couldn't believe my eyes. And he says what gang members often say, I'm tired of being tired. So he began work at Homeboy, and he found healing, and he removed tattoos, and he got therapy, and he transformed his pain, and he found a resilience that was foreign. And then we sent him to another job after his 18 months with us, and then cut to 5 years later, he's running the whole warehouse. He's the supervisor, married, 3 kids, home. I hadn't heard from him in years, and on a Friday, he called me, and he was a panic in his voice. He said, gee, you got to bless my daughter. I said, wow, son, what's wrong? Is she in the hospital? Is she sick? Oh, no, on Sunday she's going to Humboldt College. Imagine, my Lisa, 18 years old, she's going to college, but Humboldt is far and she's a little chaparrita. Could you give her a blessing before she goes? I said, oh my God, I'd be honored. So tomorrow, Saturday, I have baptisms at 1. Come at 12:30 and we'll do a little send-off. So Bandit and his wife and the 3 kids, including tiny little Lisa, show up, and I put her in front of the altar, and I said, let's surround her with our bodies. Everybody touch her, grab her arms. Go ahead, put your hand on her head, and I tell them to close their eyes and bow their heads, and as the homies would say, I do a long-ass prayer. I go on, and And somewhere in the middle of this prayer, I notice we've all become chillones, and chillones, we're all blubbering, we're all crying. I don't know why we're crying exactly, except for the fact that Bandit and his wife do not know anybody who's ever gone to college except me. Certainly nobody in their families. So I finished the prayer, and we're all wiping our eyes, and we're all laughing at how mushy we got. So to change the subject, I turned to Lisa, hey, what are you going to study at Humboldt College? And she was real quick, forensic psychology. And I go, damn, forensic psychology, and Bandit chimes in, yeah, she wants to study the criminal mind. And she looks at her dad, very deadpan, does one of these, and he laughs and he goes, yep, I'm going to be her first subject, and so we go out to the car, and big abrazos, everybody piles in the car, but he hangs back, and he says, I look at him, and before he gets in the car, I said, I give you credit for the man you've chosen to become, for choosing to walk in your own footsteps. I'm proud of you. And his eyes glisten with tears, and he says, you know what? I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife, a bueno para nada, a good for nothing. I guess I showed them. I said, yeah, I guess you did. And the soul feels its worth. You appear, and the soul will feel its worth. Let me end with this. Homies work side by side with their enemies. So it's not just a job, and it's not just training, and it's not just healing, it's not just therapy, it's not just transforming their pain. They actually have to work side by side with people they used to shoot at. And they'll always come into my office, and in the old days I would say, well, I got an opening in the bakery, but you're going to have to work with X, Y, and Z, and I rattle off the names of rivals. And they used to always say the same thing, all right, I'll work with him, I'm not going to talk to him. Which I remember 25 years ago, that would bother me, until you discover the truth, that human beings cannot demonize people they know. Can't be done. Humans can't sustain that. So I had a guy, 19 years old, we all called him Youngster, and that was his gang name. And when they're benign names, I'll call him Youngster too. If it's Sniper or, Devil or something, I don't do that, but Youngster. And he was a tiny little guy. And so there was an opening in our Homeboy silkscreen factory, which has been around for 27 years, where we do embroidery and silk screening. A big factory. Thousands of gang members have gone through there. We do high quality work, reasonably priced. We UPS to Bristol. I'm just saying. So I bring in Youngster too, and there are like 16 of his co-workers there, and I bring them all together, and I introduce him. And I notice him shake hands, firm handshake. Half these guys are enemies, rivals. And I think, wow, this is great. Until he gets to the last kid, a kid named Puppet. And when Puppet and Youngster are in each other's vicinity, they mumble something, they stare at their shoes, they don't shake hands. Well, I know they're enemies, but he just shook hands with a whole bunch of enemies. I find out later that this is a hatred that's really quite deep and personal, and beyond which neither of them think they can really get past. So I sensed that much at the moment, and I said, look, if you guys can't hang working with each other, let me know. I got a bunch of people who really want this job. Calladitos, they don't say a word. Well, 6 months later, Puppet leaves his home to go to a corner store some distance from his house, and he purchases something, but on the way home, for some reason, he takes a shortcut, and he dodges into an alley, and because he took this detour, he was suddenly surrounded by 10 members of a rival gang, 10 against 1, and they beat him badly, and he falls to the ground. And while he's lying on the ground, they will not stop kicking his head until he's lifeless. Somebody finds his body and takes him to White Memorial Hospital, where he's declared effectively brain dead. But it's the policy there to keep you connected to machines for 48 hours, so you can get 2 days finally of a flat read where there is no brain activity, it's flat. And once you have 2 days of flat, the doctors can sign the death certificate and make it official. I was at St. Louis University giving a talk. I flew home right away. I've seen a lot of horrible things in my life, but nothing to compare to the sight of this young man with his head swollen, impossibly swollen, huge. You could barely actually stare at him. It was so horrible. And as a priest, I said a blessing prayer. I anointed his forehead with oil. We disconnected, and a week later, I buried him. But in the first 24 hours, as Puppet was lying in the hospital beaten, I was alone in my office. It was 8:30 at night, and the phone rings, and it's Youngster, Puppet's coworker, at the silk screen factory. And he says, "Hey, that's messed up about what happened to Puppet." I said, "Yeah, it is." And then with a certain kind of eagerness even, he says, "Is there anything I can do? Can I give him my blood?" And we both fell silent under the weight of that, until finally he broke the silence, choking back his tears, and he said with great deliberation, "He was not my enemy. He was my friend. We worked together." Now, can I say that always happens at Homeboy Industries? Yeah. Any exceptions? I can't think of one. And it shouldn't surprise us that God's dream come true for us, that we be one, just happens to be our own deepest longing for ourselves. And so we go to the margins, and we stand there because that's the only way to erase them. And as a community of faith, we imagine a circle of compassion, and then we imagine nobody standing outside that circle. We go from this chapel to dismantle the barriers that exclude, because that's where the joy is. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for joining us. I remind you there are books at the back if you want to pick one up before you go. Father Greg will stick around for a little bit. Thank you for joining us. Come again, and have a good day.